Hi Jason, my name is Ben Langfeld and I'm a student in Manchester in the UK. I've got a question that relates to revenue models, mainly in media industries, but it can also cover other sectors as well. We all know what has happened and is happening in the music industry, and we're all braced for a similar destruction of revenues in the news media as well. The problem in these industries, other than figuring out a new model for revenue generation, is knowing how quickly changes are going to happen. For instance, pretty much nobody in the tech sector actually reads a print newspaper anymore, and the masses will surely follow, but when is the question. Similar sort of things are happening in film and TV. Obviously the best tool that an entrepreneur could ever wish for would be a crystal ball, but seeing as they're pretty rare, my question is this: how far in the future should an entrepreneur try to predict trends, and where should the line be drawn between entrepreneurship and economics? Thanks, Jason.
This actually is good. It took them a while to get there, but it's actually a very good question, which is how far out should your startup be? Because if you're too far out of where the future is, you're going to not capture.
Pave the way for the next guy to win, right?
Basically, first guy up the hill gets the arrows.
Right.
So if you're 6 Degrees, or Friendster, or Rise, you run up the hill, and then MySpace and Facebook get the prize. So how do you know you're too far ahead? I always think, I like to go into a space where somebody's pioneered a little bit, and then, but they haven't commercialized it. So when I looked at blogging as a business, there were people blogging, but nobody had really commercialized it yet. They hadn't sort of figured out the business model. So I like to see a little bit of activity, street-level activity, sort of cutting-edge people playing with something, and then try to figure out what's the business model that could be laid on top of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's definitely a, in social networking in particular, that seemed to be the case. I mean, like MySpace and Facebook certainly took the lessons of Friendster and took the lessons of other folks in that space. I actually did something called Spoke Software. We tried to go after enterprises.
I remember Spoke.
And that was,
yep.
you were, in fact, you wrote the first coverage, I think, of Spoke was on the social software. In fact, I bought the first ad on the social software weblogs. Right. But I think that there are people who seem to just hit it out of the gate immediately, but it might not be the commercialization, but seeing that there's a problem is the other part of it. Like seeing, like in the case of Google, everyone talks about them, but search was a large and well-established space. Google saw that there was a huge opportunity in actually providing something that was much better and had a technology to do that. So I think that, yeah, getting out there with a technology without a solution is a good way to wander around for a while. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, we're just starting up the TechCrunch 50, you know, interviews for, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit, for September, and I just saw a technology yesterday that somebody was pitching, and I can't say what it is because it's all under NDA, but I just thought, wow, this is a technology in search of a market,
right.
in search of a solution, and the way you can always tell this is by actually talking to the people doing something. So when we did Weblogs Inc., before we even launched it, I started blogging personally, and just doing it every day, and doing 2 or 3 different blogs, including the social software one, and I had lunch and coffee with every blogger I could find and just talk to them open-ended for an hour or two. I think it's a critical way to know if you're too far ahead, you know, or just far enough ahead or, you know, behind.
Well, this guy also had asked about the news media in particular, and it's something where we have a lot of experience in actually having newspapers as partners and watching people kind of, you know, 8% decline quarter to quarter in newspaper revenues right now and subscribership. So that one, it doesn't necessarily provide an opportunity. Other people going out of business is not necessarily an opportunity. That's something that's, you know, in media especially, the advertisers have not shifted on buying on the web as much as the declines would indicate. And I think you have to take a look at that. Like, where is the money going is another part of that in terms of looking ahead.
Yeah, I mean, revenue destruction is one of those things that just because if the revenue is being destroyed, that doesn't mean value is necessarily being created somewhere else. It could just be going away. I mean, if you think about newspapers as an example, everybody's so upset, and this is emotional response. My God, the newspapers are going away. But what does the San Francisco Chronicle or the LA Times do that's so unique and awesome that ESPN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal doesn't? You know,
is there 25,000 bloggers covering what they used to cover, right?
Exactly. Like, so it's not like there's something that there's so much massive redundancy in these newspapers. What does the 25th person at a local newspaper covering Michael Jackson's funeral add to the party?
The other thing, to get back to a specific question, basically your startup probably has a lifespan. It's not going to be 25 years before you make $1. You probably want to basically be able to get funding in let's say you start somehow either get revenue or funding in the first 6 months to a year, and then you're supposed to actually either make something of yourself in the first 2 or 3 years. So I would say more directly, if you can't be cranking some revenue in 2 to 3 years, you might want to bring in your expectations. That'd be the
that's actually another good sort of indicator. If the business if people aren't willing to pay anything to be involved in the business, there's no revenue stream. What's the point? I mean, unless you're Twitter and you can just go on forever without making
a very
money.
large amount of money in the bank, and
Yeah.
it's okay.
Well, that's the other strategy too, right? Just raise an insane amount of capital.